Alright, I'm back again with another video. This time discussing the Silent Hill 2 remake, which I just beat for the first time. It's like a week and a half ago now, by the time I'm filming this. I've been thinking about stuff, ruminating, letting all of it sink in before I wanted to film anything about this game. I know that I'm a bit late with this, like months late. I just didn't have the time to play through the game in the autumn when it was released, and I didn't want to rush playing it either. So here we are. This is probably going to take a long while. So I have a lot to say about this game. Some positive, some negative. Let's start off with the physical release itself. As you can see here, this is the PS5 version. The disc art is fantastic. Like, this is like one of the highest praises that I have for this game is that the disc art is fantastic. This is one of the most positive things I have to say about the game. I liked it, but I don't think it's nowhere near as good as people are saying that it is. So there's the iconic line from the original game, "There was a hole here, it's gone now." And then, voila, you take the disc off, there is the hole. You put it back in, now it's gone. Genius design, so good job on that. I will go through the whole game in this review in quite a bit of detail. We will start from the cover art here, and we will finish in the after the end credits. You get the stats screen, so that's where I will end. So we will go through the whole game from beginning to end, and I will touch on the most important stuff for each part of the game, I think. So we will talk about the first impressions you get from the game. We will talk about the redesigns of the characters, the enemies, the new combat system, the new areas, the new puzzles, the old stuff that has been kept in the game, the cutscenes, the new writing, everything, the new music, sound design, all the good stuff. And I will talk about all of these when it becomes relevant, when we start going through the game from the beginning. So let's start off with the cover. When you boot up the game, also just before I start, I want to mention all the comments I make in this review are based on just the new game playthrough I had. I haven't replayed the game at all, so I don't know anything about the New Game Plus. There are supposedly new endings. I don't know anything about them. All the old endings are still there. There should be some other new stuff also in the New Game Plus, but I don't know anything about that either. So this is just the one playthrough experience that I had. Now this is kind of funny because after I finished Silent Hill 2, I started playing another horror game called Withering Rooms, which I will discuss in more detail in some later video. And that one I replayed already 3 times, so I finished the game 4 times. I got the platinum for Withering Rooms, which is basically the same length as Silent Hill 2. For some reason, after finishing Silent Hill 2, I didn't feel like starting a new run immediately. So I will play the New Game Plus at some point, but I don't really know when. So yeah. Right, so after this 5-minute intro, let's start off with the review. I'll start with this score. So the people who are just interested in knowing what score I would give this game and don't want to listen to me rambling on for an hour about the game, I would give this game a light 8 out of 10. It's quite good. I enjoyed my time with it. It is nowhere near the original game. There are so many problems with this remake that it is nowhere near the experience of the original game. And well, some people may think that it's unfair to compare this game so much to the original, but I mean that's absolutely relevant. It's a remake, so you have to compare it to the original. I don't think there is, other than maybe the combat and the graphics, I don't think there is any single part in this game that is. But also maybe some of the level design is better than the original, but everything else is far inferior. But I will get to that later on. So a light 8 out of 10. I enjoyed my time. I think Blooper Team did a good job. In the other Silent Hill 2 video, which I will link in the description box, which I released before the game was released, I was cautiously optimistic with a noticeable hint of cynicism added, and I think that was justified. And I think pretty much everything that I said in the video has aged well. Although there was one commenter who didn't think that some of the stuff that I said was like good argument, what was had good argumentation, which I completely disagree with. I think I don't agree with the commenter at all. But that's enough of that stuff. So let's start off with the review now. 6.5 minute intro already. The cover art is great. However, I think there is a small problem with the imagery that is used at the beginning of the game. So in the original Silent Hill games, not just the second one, but also the original Silent Hill, the first one and also the third one, the imagery that you see is not this light and ethereal. So I think the first impression that you get of the game and what it is going to be, if you haven't played the original game, I think this gives off the wrong idea. It is too light, it's too ethereal, it's too floaty. It is dreamlike, yeah. You also see the same image when you first turn on the game, before the main menu. And I'm not a huge fan of it. Silent Hill should be dark, right? It should be darker. The color should be darker. The design is very nice and the image looks very nice. I like the design, but this is probably something that I would prefer seeing at the end of the game, maybe as a menu screen after you've beaten the game for the first time. I think this would look great. But yeah, it's a good design, but not ideal, right? And the same goes with the menu of the remake. Right? In the original 3 games in the series, I can't remember what the fourth game's menu was like, but in the original 3 games, the menu is pitch black, as it should be, and there is the logo of the game on top, and then just a very simple menu screen. And the first impression that you get from this, plus the sound effects when you move in a menu screen, it's just new game continue options. The sound effects are so creepy and strange. There was nothing like it around the time when this game was released. Like nothing like it. So immediately, even before turning on the game, you had this feeling that something is off, something is wrong here. It's a strange thing to describe, especially for the people who are playing this game without having played the original. They wouldn't even stop to think about the menu. The new game's menu is an image of the toilet at the beginning of the game, so where the game starts. And what they are going for with this image is they are doing a same kind of opening as what Santa Monica Studios, Sony Santa Monica Studios did with God of War Ragnarok, where your menu screen is this image of Kratos sitting in a cave, and then when you press New Game, the opening cutscene immediately starts from that image. It's quite interesting, right? So they are trying to do something similar with this image of the toilet that the cutscene starts from, obviously from the toilet where the game opens. But I would, again, like, this is me talking as a massive fan of the original game and the original 3 games, also like the first half of the fourth game. I would have preferred something more close to the original with the black screen. The sound effects in the remake menu are all right. Some of them are too light, especially when you're moving side to side in the sliders. It doesn't sound like Silent Hill. It sounds too light and too. It isn't foreboding enough. So yeah, again, this is sort of some stuff that a lot of people would think is like not important. Why are you talking about the menu screen and the opening, like loading screen of the game? Why? Like it's not important. It is absolutely important. It is some of the most important stuff in the game. The first impression that is given to the player, because that feeling that you get from the first impression is what carries on with you throughout the game. So it is absolutely important to nail this stuff, and I don't think that Blooper Team really nailed it. It's all right, but it's not perfect. It's not as good as the old ones. Now, the game opens with the cutscene. It's pretty close to the original cutscene. One part that I do not like at all, again, which changes the first impression, is the way I've complained about this to a couple of friends so many times that if they're listening to this, they are just laughing to themselves because I'm talking about it again. But the way that James, the main character, touches his face in the opening cutscene has been changed, and I don't know why. Because in the original game, James touches his face in a completely unnatural and just an uncanny, weird way. He takes his palm and puts it in the middle of his face. And like that is not, no human would do that, right? In the remake, he just slightly touches his cheek, like anyone would. And this first impression of the character, again, it changes how it feels. In the original game, James immediately feels like not even fully human, just some odd person in some odd place. And yeah, it's again a small thing, but I think it's important. Now, after this opening toilet stuff, you get immediately during the cutscene taken out of the toilet into the parking lot, where there's the famous reading of the letter. Now, I absolutely hate the version of the song that is plays in this scene in the remake. It's called, I think, Wishful Thinking, the song. There's also another version of it called Letters that plays later on in a game that I think is fantastic. So I don't know why Akira Yamaoka, like the two most important tracks in the game for me are Wishful Thinking and Promise Reprise, and I think that Akira Yamaoka completely fucked up both of those new versions. I dislike both of them heavily for different reasons. Wishful Thinking, the original one, is extremely simple. It's not minimalistic because there's lots of notes in it, but it's extremely stripped down. It's an acoustic guitar track. It's so somber and so sad. And the new version has all of this added instrumentation and this all like new ambience behind it. And I think it diminishes the effectiveness of the song. Like the effectiveness of the song in the original game was that it was a stripped down acoustic guitar track. And I don't like at all the new version with all of the added instrumentation. But that's just me. That's my taste in music. Now, after this cutscene, we get to play the game. And what do we see? There is a completely new camera angle or camera system. The original game had set camera angles. Every time you went to a spot on the map, there was a set camera angle, a fixed camera angle that wouldn't change. Now, they've completely changed the system into a over-the-shoulder style. It looks a lot like Resident Evil 4 and something like God of War, the new ones. And this is both a positive and a negative. It's a positive because it makes movement much more simple. I've seen online some people complain that the new camera is awful and that it's difficult to control and that the controls are bad. I do not understand what these people are talking about, because I think the controls are much, much better in a remake than they were in the original game. In the original game, it was often disorienting when you went into a room and there was a fixed camera angle, and you could never know whether it was from the right side or the left side or from the front or wherever it was from. And it just was kind of awkward often to move. You could use to it. I don't really have a problem with the controls of the original game at all. Maybe it's just because I've played so many horror games and I'm used to tank controls, but I thought the controls in the original game was pretty good as well. Definitely effective. They added to the horror elements of the game. The new combat system and the movement system, it takes away from the horror, because in the original game you had many spots, for example, where you would enter a room and the camera was aimed at yourself. You couldn't even see what was in the room. You could just hear the noises of the enemies. You wouldn't know specifically which enemy there is, if there are multiple enemies, and it made for a pretty tense experience. Now, in a remake, they've tried to add some stuff to make it kind of work somehow similarly, but it doesn't really work. I'll talk more about that when we get to the apartments, the first main gameplay area. So yeah, there are positives and negatives. Another thing that is immediately obvious is that Blooper Team want to show off the graphics of the game, which are quite good. I think the game looks great. There are some graphical bugs and errors. Some items in a distance have this weird white shimmering effect and stuff like that. A lot of it has been fixed with patches. Apparently at launch there were much more problems with, or many more problems with the graphics of the game, and especially shimmering and like tearing and stuff like this. I didn't see any of that, except for some items in some places. But because Blooper are trying to show off the graphics, there is much less fog, especially at the start of the game. When you get to Silent Hill, it gets better, but at the beginning of the game, there isn't really any fog on the parking lot. Not really. It gets thicker and thicker the closer you get to Silent Hill. So a small change, not really a big deal. Just something I thought should be mentioned. Like a lot of people, again, I've read some comments online, not that many. I haven't listened to any or read any reviews of the game, so these are just my thoughts. But I did read before launch, people who got early access to the game and stuff like that the fog was awful and there was too little of it. I don't really see that in a game. Maybe they've changed it for the retail release. Maybe it was part of like a day one patch or something. But I think the fog looks great in the game. After you get to a place that is foggy, the parking lot isn't that place, right? Then we get to the first save screen, and this is great. One of my favorite things about Silent Hill games, the originals, is that whenever you go to a save, like they are these red squares. Whenever you touch one, the whole screen goes so bright red that it burns your freaking eyes. And that effect has been perfected with this remake. One of the highest compliments I can give to this game. The disc art and how painful it is to look at the save screen. The red flash is such an eye killer, especially with the lights off, that I absolutely love it. Also, some added stuff. In the original game, you have a static image of James's face when you're saving. In the remake, it's animated. It's really weird, and it's great. It fits the game great. It's like a point of view shot from the point of view of the square. You see James looking at the save, like what is it even called? Like save file thing. They're just the red square. You see James looking at it with this empty stare, and he's there like moving. His head is moving. He's making these small sounds, like deep sighs and stuff like that. I think that's great. Like that's one of the best changes they've made for the remake. Then after a brief stroll through the woods, we get to the graveyard. So from this point on, I will be spoiling the entire story of the game. So if you haven't played the original Silent Hill 2, if you haven't played the remake, and you want to enjoy the story without having been spoiled, you've been warned. I will spoil absolutely everything about the story. So in the graveyard, we meet the first redesigned NPC character. Now, let's talk briefly about the redesigns themselves. There aren't that many characters in the game. There is James, who I think looks great in the remake. In the early materials that were shown, the first trailer and so on, I thought his face looked bloated. He looked a lot older than he should have, and he just kind of looked weird. He looked like David Lynch, rest in peace, whose face was bloated, basically, and with less crazy hairstyle. In the final version of this game, I think James looks great. There are some moments in some cutscenes where there is this uncanny valley effect that he doesn't really look like the same character always, especially when he's doing some physical activity and he has this grimace on his face. This like he's like, for example, in the hospital when he's trying to push open the hospital doors during one of the cutscenes. We'll get to that later. I think his face looks absolutely awful, like awkward and weird, and he doesn't even look like the same character. So there are some quirks in the cutscenes, but in general, I think James looks great. Now, in the graveyard, we meet the absolute worst redesign in recent memory, which is the Angela redesign. She doesn't look like anything. She doesn't look anything like the original character. She has the same style of clothing and the hairstyle, but the face is just weird. A lot of people have complained about this, like the uglification of video game characters. I don't think that's the case here. I just think that her face is poorly designed. Like after you hear this, you will never be able to unsee it, but Angela in the remake looks like Fox Mulder, like the actor David Duchovny or Duchovsky, like whatever his last name is, from X-Files. She looks like him, and it is weird. It looks like Fox Mulder with a wig, and I cannot unsee it, and it disturbs me. The problem with the Angela redesign also, I guess all of the biggest complaints I have about this game, they are all related to Angela. I think Blooper Team completely and utterly fucked up Angela in this game. The cutscenes, the final cutscene especially, where she's ascending the flaming staircase, I thought they completely messed up that cutscene. More about that later. I think they completely messed up the Abstract Daddy boss fight. More about that again later on in a video. I think these are some of the worst parts of the game, and that is sad because in the original game, Angela is by far my favorite side character. Right? She's an iconic horror game character. Just one of the saddest side character stories ever told, ever written in a video game. She is incredible, and she's a character that should be perfected in this remake, and she hasn't been perfected. The voice actress is pretty good. I like that. Also for James, the voice actor is phenomenal. Again, I prefer the original game because of how odd it is. The voice acting in the original game, it's so weird. I'll return to this again later on when I talk about the final cutscene with Angela, because it's related to some of the stuff that I have to say about that. But the voice actors are just across the board, pretty good. The weakest voice actor is probably Mary, because she's trying so hard to be seductive that it's quite awkward. But otherwise, the voice actors are great. Eddie is great. Laura is great. Mary, obviously, again, great. Now, back to the redesigns. Mary, I will talk about later on. Eddie looks absolutely disgusting in the best way possible. We will only meet him later on in a game, but I will say here that some of the changes they made with Eddie and his cutscenes are disgusting and just delightful. So I thoroughly enjoyed Eddie in this game. And then another strange redesign choice is Laura, the little girl. I'm not sure why they changed her so much, because she looks, again, like Angela. Laura looks nothing like the original character from the original Silent Hill 2, except that she has a blonde ponytail and wears like these clothes that a little child would. Her face is completely different. And this is an odd change, primarily because I thought it was intentional in the original game that Laura kind of looked like Mary and Maria. Also, now I also realized that when I last said that I will talk more about the redesign of Mary, I meant Maria, like Mary and Maria. I will talk about both of them later. But Laura, I thought it was intentional in the original game that she looked kind of like Mary and Maria. In the story of the game, we know that Laura is this little girl who was apparently in the same hospital as Mary, the wife of James Sunderland, who was ill and then died of the disease, which is the reason why James is in Silent Hill. Well, she didn't die of the disease; she died because James killed her. But that's the end of the game. And I thought it was intentional because that Laura looks kind of like Mary. She looked like she could be the daughter of Mary, right? I thought that was intentional, but maybe I read too much into it, because she has kind of like somewhat similar facial features. This kind of a narrow face with this small nose and a wide mouth, and the blonde hair. Well, Mary doesn't have blonde hair, as you can see here. Like, she has brown hair, but Maria has blonde hair, who is the other Mary in the game. I'll get back to that also later on. But yeah, they completely changed Laura's face. Don't know why. Probably unnecessary. There are a lot of changes that Bloober Team have made in this game that I think are unnecessary. They aren't necessarily negatives, because they're just kind of just changes for the sake of changing something. It doesn't really matter in most cases. But when I got to the hotel, it started to annoy me how they were just changing so much stuff for seemingly no reason, really. Right, but again, something I will get back to later. Also, we are at 30-minute mark currently, and I'm still at the beginning of the game, so maybe I should move on. But yeah, everything I've said so far about the game, neutral, some positive, some neutral, some small critiques. Nothing really that bad yet, except for maybe the Angela redesign. But I can live with her face looking like Fox Mulder, if everything else is done properly. But it hasn't been. So, all right. So now we get to Silent Hill, through the graveyard. And this section of the game is probably at least twice as long, maybe even 3 times as long as it was in the original game. And this is the case for pretty much all of the playable areas in the game. They are large. There is new stuff. There is a lot of new content, and there is a lot of old content that is missing. So before we get to the apartments, we have to get a weapon. So obviously, in the beginning of the game, I'm exploring before seeing the first monster, because I know that after I see the monster, there is going to be more monsters. So I'm exploring the town. I see that there are some new buildings you can get into. Interesting stuff. But yeah, I decided to follow the monster and get my weapon. And at this point, I was quite surprised because I was going to the dirt track to get my plank of wood. But the dirt track is blocked off. You can't get there. And instead, there is a collectible, which is kind of like a memory, a vision from the past. And when I saw this, I thought, oh, they've changed it. Also, this memory kind of indicates that there is some kind of a time loop thing going on. And oh boy, there is a time loop. I will talk about that later on. But yeah, the first enemy and the weapon that you get has been moved to a completely new place, as has almost everything in Silent Hill. The buildings are pretty much in the same places, not all of them. For example, later on, the strip club, Heaven's Night, has been changed to a completely different location. But for the most part, the buildings are there. You can now get into the Happy Burger. There is a music store you can enter. There is a smaller apartment complex before the larger apartment complex. There's a lot of different buildings you can get into, lots of new content, lots of notes, like writing you can find. There is a new puzzle at the beginning with this vinyl record that you have to glue together and then put into this jukebox, like a small little puzzle with how you operate the jukebox. And it's all right. It's mostly just harmless filler. There isn't really a purpose for it. It's just there for new content, which is fine, I guess, because as someone who has played the original Silent Hill 2, I think 7 or 8 times, which is very unusual for me. I rarely replay games. Usually if I replay a game, it's for trophies and just once or twice at the most. But I've played through the original game 7 or 8 times at this point. So it's kind of interesting to see this new content in this old game that I absolutely love. So I don't have a problem with the starting area, really. Maybe the only problem is that it kind of throws off the pacing of the opening, because in the original game it was quite brisk and fast. After you got your weapon, you would basically just immediately go to the apartments, just find the key and go into the apartments. Here you are just wandering around for an hour or two instead. Now, when I got the first weapon, which is the wooden plank, which is just an awful weapon, one thing that I immediately noticed, which is, well, I guess I know the reason for this, and it's also, again, this is kind of a positive and a negative, but in the first Silent Hill 2 video that I filmed, like the one where I talked about Blooper Team and the game series and kind of the reception that the remake had got online before launch and how that was not really fair for Blooper Team. One of the problems that I talked about in the original gameplay trailer was that there wasn't weapon switching animations at all, and there still aren't any, and I find it very strange. It is a good thing because it keeps the flow of the combat quite fast. With weapon switch animations, the combat would be even slower and the game would take even longer to finish. This is already around a 20-hour game, which is really long for a horror game. So the no weapon switch animations, if you have a pistol and a wooden plank, for example, and you hit an enemy with a wooden plank and then you start aiming with a pistol, the pistol just warps into your hand without any animation. Now, in the original game, this is a problem that they have encountered when they changed so much stuff. In the original game, all of the weapon switching and everything like that was done in a menu. So you would pause the game, go into the item menu that you had, which had all of the healing items and the weapons and everything, right? You would go into this menu and you would switch your weapons there. So there is no weapon switch animation needed. Now, because there are no proper item menu, it's only used for combining items, like nothing else really. You have this problem. Do we need weapon switch animations? It is extremely unrealistic that there aren't any, but this is a video game, so it doesn't really matter. So it looks kind of stupid, but in terms of gameplay, it's a good thing that there aren't any weapon switch animations. Again, the combat would be even slower. Now, the combat system itself, I think, is much better than it was in the original game. In the original game, you just have James standing there like a fool, hitting a wooden plank and sometimes hitting something, maybe. Now, this new combat system is extremely violent. It's very brutal. The hits feel very heavy and impactful. And the sound effects are incredible. The sound design overall for this game is just insanely good. All of the ambience, all of the new soundtrack, except for the couple of tracks that I mentioned at the start of the game, are incredible. Kind of like the old one, but also a bit new. There's some new music there as well. I at least I think, because I didn't recognize all of the background ambience. And yeah, the sound design is so good. It really adds to the combat and the impacts of the hits and James's grunting and everything. There is also a Resident Evil 4 type dodge move that is very heavily utilized in a combat, and it works kind of good sometimes, kind of not really at other times, especially if there are multiple enemies. It's kind of awkward to use the dodge, but it works pretty well. I don't know if a Silent Hill game should have a dodge button. It just feels odd and wrong, but well, it's still better than what we had in the original game. Like, the combat in Silent Hill 2 is by far one of the worst parts of the game, except for that it really makes you feel like you're playing as just a random guy who doesn't know how to use weapons. But other than that, the combat is just awful in the original game. So yeah, the combat system, again, some pluses, some minuses. I think it's pretty good. Now, the problem with the combat throughout this game is that there is too much of it. In the original game, there is a part of a 10-star run, so a max star run, is that you kill 75 enemies with melee and 75 enemies with ranged weapons. I've never done it in the original game. I think the most enemies I've probably killed in a single run is maybe not even 50 in the original game. In the remake, when I finished the game, in the stats menu, I was just shocked. I had killed over 360 enemies. There is so much combat in this game, and there are so many enemies in this game that it's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. I think they should have made combat less of a focal point, because there is just an insane amount of it. And it starts to get kind of tedious the more you do it, because there is only a couple of enemy types. How many are there? Maybe, are there even 6? There's the hangers, the spitters, the other type of spitter. There's the nurses. Then there's the guys who climb on walls. The guys who climb. Yeah, there's like 6 or 7 enemy types, plus the bosses. So you keep fighting the same enemies over and over and over and over again. And the animations for the enemies are pretty good. They are often quite easy to read. So when you need to dodge, when you can hit. But at times there is a little variance there. So there is always somewhat of a danger there. Also, the enemies are much more dangerous, especially in the early game when you only have the wooden plank. I almost died when I was playing this early section in Silent Hill, like this first section of the game. I almost died multiple times, and I was running out of healing items because I was exploring so much and meeting so many enemies, and just didn't really have a grasp of the combat system yet. But the more you play, the more you start realizing, oh, there's just a couple of little tricks that you have to do. When there's a spitter, you sprint past it, behind it, and then it starts spitting. You hit it once, and then you start sprinting again. Like you can do it like that. After you get the lead pipe, you can just spam the enemies to death for the most part. But yeah, in the early game, the new enemies are well, the old enemies who are redesigned. They are not new enemies. They are quite dangerous, and it takes a little bit of time to get used to the combat system. The enemy redesigns are, again, great. One of the biggest positives I have for this game. The enemy redesigns look disgusting in the best possible way. They are absolutely disgusting and horrendous to look at. Especially the nurses in a hospital who are just bleeding everywhere when you hit them. And these early game enemies, so just I can't remember the names of the enemy types. I've never really studied them, but just the basic enemies that walk around and spit like this acid goo at you, and the then when you get to the apartments, the guys who have legs for hands and are just flailing everywhere, like great stuff. There are a couple of enemy types that I don't think look that great, but I will talk about that later on when we meet them in a game. When it comes to the enemy types, I was kind of surprised that they didn't add more new enemies because they've changed so much stuff. There is a little bit of an addition later on in the game. Again, I'll talk about that when we get there to the hotel. But there aren't really any new enemies. And there's also an enemy type that was removed, which is the hospital nurse with a pistol or a revolver. I don't really remember. Some kind of a handgun. That was completely removed. So weird. Oh yeah, there is a new enemy type in the prison as well. The guys who crawl on walls and jump around. That was interesting. But yeah, not really many changes in the enemy types themselves. Now, one problem that I think there is with this new camera angle and this new combat is that there aren't any loading screens, or at least any visible loading screens. In the original game, you would go through a door, there was a loading screen, and then you were in a new room. And after you left that room, another loading screen, and you were out of the room, and nothing could move in between the rooms. Now, that added for a great deal of strategy, because there were multiple scares involved with that, especially in the original hospital. There was a room in the original hospital where you entered and there were 3 nurses just running at you. Well, not really running, like limping at you as fast as they could, right? And I remember just being just shitting my pants almost when that happened for the first time. And this has been completely removed from the new game, obviously, because there are no loading screens and we don't have the set cameras. So the no loading screens thing, it makes the enemies again more aggressive and more dangerous because they can sometimes come through doors and come after you into the next room. But it loses this sense of strategy. Okay, if I run here, I can enter this room and there's an item. If I want to, I can take the risk and get the item and then get out fast. I could try to enter the room and see like how the enemy reacts and try to run past it. But if I don't want to fight it, I can just turn around and get out of the door and that's it. I don't have to face the enemy. In this game, you are forced to fight the enemies. They run after you from room to room, which is quite annoying. I don't really like that change. I think the original game did it much better. And it was much more effective for a horror game to have this room to room type of gameplay, much like something like Resident Evil, the original Resident Evil games. Now, do I have anything else to say about the Silent Hill, the town itself? Oh yeah, also with the no loading screens and the no fixed camera angles, they are kind of trying to get the same type of atmospheric effect like I discussed earlier, with the sometimes not seeing what is in the room and just hearing it. They are trying to emulate it by having redesigned many of the room layouts. So there are many like these like walls separating areas. When you enter the room, there are often like doorways and these walls that kind of like obstruct vision, so that enemies are hiding behind and this sort of thing. But it just isn't the same thing. They are kind of trying to emulate the same effect. It kind of works, kind of not. It's not really the same thing. But again, is it a plus? Is it a minus? I don't know. They're trying their best, I guess. That sounded very condescending and a very negative. Sounded like a very negative comment, but well, it kind of was. Well, yeah. Moving on, we get from Silent Hill to the apartments. Now, this is the first proper playable area, like a set piece playable area. Oh yeah, that reminds me of the thing. I almost forgot to say this about the town of Silent Hill. There are all of these buildings that you can get into, like I mentioned, the music shop and everything. There isn't really anything interesting in them. Like I mentioned that most of the new content in the early, like the town area, is harmless filler. Like all of these buildings, it's just filler, basically. There isn't really anything interesting in them. And there are all of these notes, all of these notes everywhere in the game, and all of this is new writing. Almost all of it, not 100%, but many of the notes are new and added. I think there are 68 of them in a game. I found 66 of them without any guide or anything. So I was exploring guide quite thoroughly, and these notes are such a waste of time, so worthless. And this is one of the this is one of the biggest problems that I have with the remake, is that the original game was a very, very tight game. There wasn't really any filler in it. You were constantly moving on, going forward, getting somewhere. And the game was like 6 hours long, maybe even less. After you knew what you were doing, you could finish the game like under an hour and a half. It was a very short and concise piece of art, not just a video game, just a piece of art, extremely well written. And now Blooper Team has added all of this just mediocre garbage into the game that the notes are a perfect example of. Like, why would I want in my Silent Hill game to pick up a note that is titled Sinister Note, and then there is some guy talking about how there is something inside him and it's awful. It's such generic horror nonsense. Silent Hill doesn't need that. Right? Silent Hill is not a mediocre horror franchise. Or the first 3 games aren't, and the first half of the 4th game isn't. The later games are, but there are many parts in this remake that remind me of Silent Hill Homecoming. I will comment on that later, and I just can't. All right. So the notes, all of this mediocre writing added to the game. It is not adding anything meaningful to the game. This side stuff, right? It doesn't add to the game. And because the original game is such an iconic piece of writing, especially, like one of the best stories told in video games, and some of the best character writing in video games. When you add all of this mediocre writing to the game, it does not add anything positive to the experience. It's the opposite effect, right? It's one of the reasons why I think that this remake is far inferior to the original game. Like all of this added new writing. The worst piece of writing comes later in one of the cutscenes, but again, more on that later. All right, 50 minutes, and we are just entering the apartments. All right, so the apartment is massive. It's much larger than the original game. There are lots of different changes. The layout is completely different. There are like similar rooms, similar spots, similar corridors, but the places have been changed quite dramatically. And this is the same for all of the playable areas. They have been redesigned with a very heavy hand. And this, I think, is a positive for the most part, because especially the later areas in a game, so the prison and the labyrinth, I think in the original game they are quite rushed and they feel like they aren't finished really. They aren't what Team Silent would have liked them to be, most likely. I don't know if this is true, but that's how it felt like when I played the original game. Especially the prison is very short, and there are multiple puzzles like almost next to each other. There are also multiple boss fights almost right after one another, so it feels like it's rushed and they were running out of time. So in this game, like these new playable areas are just massive, and they are full of these, like I mentioned before, these memories, like these collectible memories. So there are puzzles from the original game that aren't in this game, but they are in this game as sort of memories. Like this has happened at some point before. Again, we get to the time loop stuff, which becomes more and more obvious the more you play the game and the further on you get in the game. Like this time loop was kind of a theory among fans of the original game. There are hints in the original game that James is stuck in some kind of a loop, that he's going through this storyline and meeting all of these characters and going through all of these places over and over again, kind of like he's in a limbo or something like that. That was a theory, and Bloober Team took that theory and just hits the player over the head with it over and over again when playing through this game, and I don't like that at all. Like there are so many changes in this remake that are taking stuff from the original game and then hitting the player over the head with it, taking away all of the mystique, all of the intrigue, all of the speculation, and just making it kind of canon, I guess, if the remake is canon. But yeah. There are also, in apartments, there are new puzzles. The coin puzzle has been like redone completely. In the original game, you just had these 3 coins and you put them in the right slots, and that's it. In the new puzzle, you put the coins in the right slots, and then you get a new riddle and you have to change the positions of the coins. And then you get a new riddle and you have to change the position of the coins. And the story keeps going, and there's multiple different stages to it. I thought that this was a very good variation to the original puzzle. I liked it a lot. The new layout also, for the most part, I think it's really good. You have all of the main stuff, like you have the trash chute where you have to put the like freaking juice cans in. You have that. You have the corridor where you first meet Pyramid Head. You have all of the main rooms. They are kind of in different places, and you kind of go to them in a different order. For example, you meet Eddie much earlier, I felt like, than you would in the original game. They changed the outdoor, like the what is it called? Like the outdoor area with the pool. They moved that to a completely new place. Just lots of changes. Talking about these changes, one thing that I thought was a negative is that when you first see Pyramid Head, it's this iconic shot when you go down the corridor. He's there just standing behind the bars and staring at you. A couple of changes they made to this shot that made it like not as effective as all. I thought this shot was really like badly done. They put Pyramid Head so close to the bars, like much closer, I felt like in the original game, or at least maybe there was more light in the corridor or something like that. You could clearly just see Pyramid Head, like everything about him. And he didn't seem really that intimidating. I thought the Pyramid redesign is weird. It's one of the worst redesigns when it comes to these enemies in the game. I thought Pyramid Head looked kind of smaller than I thought he should. He doesn't have this otherworldly look to him. In the original game, his body is very dark. The pyramid on his head is very dark and looks completely rusted and it's full of like blood or something. It's very dark. In the remake, Pyramid Head is this light character. The pyramid is just clean metal with some spots of rust. And it just looks like a dude in a Pyramid Head outfit. It's very strange. It looks like a muscular guy in a Pyramid Head outfit. It doesn't look like this otherworldly, foreboding creature that is coming to kill you. Very strange. Also, one bug that I encountered in this game, when Pyramid Head was standing there in a corridor, he was kind of doing like this shuffle little dance-like move. It looked like he was doing a Fortnite dance. So, not that scary. Not very effective. So, probably should have spent a little more time working on that. Now, that's pretty much everything I have to say about the apartments. They moved the clock puzzle into the other side of the apartments, like after you go from the first set of apartments into the first part is like the woodside apartments, and then you get to the Blue Creek apartments. So they moved these puzzles like very heavily from place to place. And there was like the clock puzzle had to deal with these doors, and was a much larger part of the game. Now, the boss fight. We get to the first boss fight. I was happy to see the original boss fight room in the game. So it's the concrete room with the stairs going downstairs. In the original game, you had water there. So you, like, again, the order in which you go through the apartments is completely different. Like you come up the stairs at one point before even fighting the boss, which is very strange as someone who has played the original game multiple times. The new boss, the room is incredibly large. And this is a thing that will keep on happening through the game. The boss fight rooms are much, much, much larger than in the original game. I don't really know why they felt the need to change it this much. Maybe there is a game design perspective to it. Maybe when they were playtesting it, they had smaller rooms that didn't quite work, so they had to make them larger. I don't know what is going on with this. But this is the first boss fight. This is the Pyramid Head boss fight, where you have to either just run around the room and dodge all of his attacks without attacking him, getting this time out when the siren starts blasting and he just leaves the room, or you can speed up the fight by shooting at him, and then you don't have to wait as long. This boss fight is almost the same as in the original. The only differences really, or notable differences that I noticed, are the larger room, which means that Pyramid Head has new moves. He has this sort of like a running type of thing where he starts running after you. In the original game, he moved extremely slowly and swung his sword extremely slowly, so the boss has been sped up noticeably. He has lots of more movement speed. But otherwise, it was pretty much the same boss. Like, nothing much changed really, so that's fine, I guess. I don't think that the original boss fight was anything special in the original game, and I feel pretty much the same about the new one. Now, after this, we get to Rosewater Park, where we meet one of the iconic characters in the game, Maria. The park is larger, looks really nice. There is a new, like a pagoda type of like structure where Maria is standing. Looks very atmospheric. I like the change a lot. In the original game, she was just standing there on a pier. The pagoda looks great. There is also a fun little foreshadowing bit in the cutscene, because when the camera pans around, you can see in certain points the light from the end of the game that you have to follow when you're rowing across the lake. You can see the light there in the distance in a cutscene. A very nice little bit of foreshadowing and a detail that I appreciated. Now, the Maria redesign. This is something that has been talked about a lot from the beginning when we first saw Maria and her redesign. And it's not good. One thing that I didn't mention during the apartments section of this video is that they toned down a lot the sexuality of Pyramid Head, or the sexual acts that Pyramid Head is engaged in the apartments. They've cleaned it up. So in the apartments, there are 2 cutscenes where Pyramid Head is clearly violating corpses, for example, or these like enemies, the corpses of enemies. And this has been completely removed from the game, and it cannot be removed. And it's the same thing with Maria's redesign. She cannot be redesigned like this if you want to be faithful for the original game, or faithful towards the original game. I heard in a podcast that Gene Park, the video game journalist, he, for example, and many other people, said that one of the strengths of this game is that Bloober Team respected the original game. And I couldn't disagree more with that assessment because of the changes to Angela and the changes to Maria. Like, these are changes that you just cannot make. It could be that this is forced by Sony or Konami or some other entity, maybe some like sponsors for some of these companies or like partners wouldn't want to be associated with a game with a very heavy emphasis on sexual violence, which the original Silent Hill 2 has. And if you remove it or tone it down, it's a problem, because there is so much of it in the original game that toning it down makes it feel like a cop-out. And it completely changes the personality of James, because all of this stuff is because of James and what he is thinking throughout his journey through Silent Hill. Like, the stuff that you see comes from the mind of James Sunderland. And if it's changed, the personality of James Sunderland and the characterization of James Sunderland dramatically shifts. So in the original game, Maria is a sexual object. Like, she is objectified, right? And that is on purpose, and removing it completely ruins the character and the original purpose of the character. Maybe some people would disagree with this, that like this is breathing new life into the character or something like that, but I can't see it, right? Maria is, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, Maria is the version of James's wife, Mary, that he wishes she would be instead of the sick woman that she is. Like, we see in the ending cutscenes of this remake much more clearly than in the original game, like the damage that the sickness or the illness that she's dealing with has on her physical appearance. Like she looks like a radiation victim with all of these like these horrendous like changes to her face with these like almost like boils all over her face. Like yeah. So James would prefer to have a wife who doesn't look like that. In his darkest thoughts, he wants to get rid of this sick woman that she eventually he would get rid of. And Maria is the sexual version of Mary. She's blonde. She wears a really tight leather miniskirt. All of this leopard print thing, if apparently James is into that. And she is clearly there just to be a sex object, something for James to look at. And well, James tries to deny that he's not interested in Maria, but obviously he is, because he has created this character in her mind, or in his mind, right? But in the remake, they haven't completely changed how she looks. She still looks much more like seductive than the other characters in a game, but she doesn't show as much skin. She doesn't really act like she did in the original game. They've changed her personality completely into this odd, like just awkward, seductive person. Like this person who is constantly trying to make these sexual advances quite awkwardly towards James, and the voice actress talks in this very, very seductive low voice constantly. It's really annoying, but it doesn't work because they are trying to replace the sexual look of the character with a sexual personality, and the personality doesn't come off as sexual, it just comes off as awkward and weird, and kind of like, if I was James, I wouldn't want to be close to this woman at all. In the original game, she's just there for James to look at. She's a sexual object, very clearly. In the cutscenes, she's all right. But when you start to play the game, when she's following you in this section before the hospital, she is incredibly annoying. And this is one of the cardinal sins with the redesign of this character. The original Maria wasn't annoying. All right, so this is going to be a take that a lot of people, especially if there are women watching this, you are not going to like what I'm going to say next, but I have to say it because it's relevant to the character. If James comes up with this character, like it comes from the mind of James, this sexy version of Maria, why would he imagine this character as a constantly nagging, annoying person? In the original game, she's not that. She follows James quietly. Sometimes maybe, I can't even remember, does she talk at all when she's following you during the original game? I can't remember. Maybe she does have some lines, but I can't remember it. In this game, she's constantly talking. And as I say that, I am starting to run out of battery on my camera, so I have to stop probably here, and I'll like edit the videos together. But yeah, I'll talk about Maria for as long as I can. She's constantly nagging. She's constantly talking to you, commenting on where you're going. Oh, why are we going this way? We should be going that way. Oh, this way. I thought we were going that way. The gate is over there, but I guess we can go over here if you want. She's constantly talking. It's so annoying. Oh my god. But yeah, I'll stop here and I'll complete. I'll continue. I'll cool down a bit and I'll continue complaining about Maria in just a bit. Yeah, so I'm back with a full battery, also a full stomach because I made some soup while waiting, ate that, drank some water, feeling refreshed, ready to continue from Maria being annoying. So we are, after Rosewater Park, running around the north side of West Silent Hill, the west side of the map. And she's constantly nagging, she's constantly talking. Some of the discussion is just harmless banter. There are again new locations you can go to. There's a garage that you have to find a key to enter. Or not really a key, just an item to enter. And there's some discussions between James and Maria there. Also, if you go to the Historical Society at this point, you get some extra dialogue. There's also a hidden, kind of like an Easter egg if you follow the road past the Historical Society and stuff like that. But the main event here in this area is the bowling alley, which is a fan favorite moment in the original game. In the original game, there is a cutscene between Eddie and Laura, where they are eating pizza and having an odd discussion. And for a moment, I was extremely, extremely disappointed because that cutscene is completely removed from the game. However, it's a bait and switch, because there's another cutscene. It has been moved to a different place that I will get to in just a moment. But yeah, there's a remnant of the pizza. It's moldy. It's disgusting. I was very annoyed for a moment, but it's fine. There's again just a bunch of filler before we get to the hospital. You have to go through a gate into the backyards of people, and there's this incredible new added action set piece where a bunch of enemies attack you, and you have to either fight all of them like I did. I just murdered all of them, or just run away from them through the backyards of people, through different fences and stuff, with this pumping aggressive music in the background. And it's whatever. It wasn't really that amazing of a moment, but it's all right. Then we get to the strip club, which has been moved from next to the bowling alley into the south part of this area of the map. And the strip club is pretty much the same. There's again some added dialogue. Maria does a lot of talking. There are posters and items in a building that you can explore. It can affect the ending that you get. If you look at all of the items, you get closer to the Maria ending, which is by far the ending that I want to avoid, because I've always disliked that ending. The strip club is fine. The music, again, it's just not as good as the original. I keep saying this, but yeah, I guess the problem with this song, and also Promise Reprise, which I didn't talk about earlier because I wanted to save it for this moment. The problem with both Promise Reprise and Heaven's Night. So Promise Reprise is the piano track that plays when you first meet Angela, when she's lying on the ground at the apartments. The problem with both of these new versions of these songs is that they feel more ordinary. They miss this otherworldly ambience that the original songs had. Promise Reprise is the absolute worst example of this, right? If you don't know these songs, you can go on YouTube, listen to the original Promise Reprise. It's like a minute and a half long. And then after listening to the original, listen to the new one. And you will hear that, well, first of all, the piano is much more in the background, at least on the OST version. In game, I didn't pay attention to it, but in YouTube, I paid attention to it. So the piano isn't as loud, it's not as high in the mix. And then the electronics, the soundscape behind the piano in the original game, in the original version of the song, there's this otherworldly quality to the electronics. In the new version, there's nothing like it. It's generic. I don't want to use the word generic when discussing the music of Akira Yamaoka because he's a legend and he's great, and most of the music or in this remake is like great, like really good, really good. But there's a couple of these songs that bother me a lot. It's the same with Heaven's Night. The original song had this very prominent otherworldly feel to the ambience. It's difficult to explain, but if you listen to the songs, you will probably understand what I mean, hopefully. And the new one is just more generic. It's not as weird. It's not as strange. It's not as unique. And that's a problem because Silent Hill 2 is not just some horror game. It is the horror game. It's the definitive survival horror game, or at least one of them. So making it more generic, this also combines with what I talked about the writing before, like how the new writing is generic, the notes and everything you find. It bothers me a lot when you make something that's a masterpiece more generic. And I just cannot stand it. After the strip club, we finally get... No, we don't actually. We don't get to the hospital yet because there is a new added area, which is the movie theater. And this movie theater, well, it's a very short section of the game, but it's important because in here we have the new cutscene between Eddie and Laura. So, like I just said, there isn't a cutscene for them anymore in the bowling alley, but it has been moved to this new location. Also, before this new location, there's a small section in this smaller park. I don't know why Silent Hill needs so many parks, but there are 2 parks now. There's a new park there that you couldn't access in the original game. And there's some added dialogue, added cutscenes with Maria. It's not really that interesting or useful. It's just building on the themes of the game that should be obvious to the player anyway. So just, filler content, basically. If there is something very significant there, let me know, because I'm definitely interested in hearing about it, but I didn't really catch anything in this new stuff here that was particularly interesting or useful. So in the movie theater, there's a small chase sequence, Laura running away, you're going after her and blah, blah, blah. But the interesting part here, and the important part here, is the cutscene with Eddie. And this is probably the funniest thing in the whole game. With Eddie just sitting there in his chair in front of the screen, the movie screen, has this massive tub of ice cream, and he's just eating it with his bare hands, just sticking his hand into the bucket of ice cream and then just shoving it against his face. It's absolutely disgusting and hilarious at the same time. Like, why would anyone eat ice cream like this? Like, is there a human being on planet Earth who eats ice cream like this? There cannot be. It's insane. It's insane. And also, during the cutscene, there's a pizza also there in the movie theater. James just takes the pizza and just puts it on the floor. And after the cutscene, you can walk over the pizza. Like, what is this? What is this theater? Like this is the funniest part in the game, and just great stuff. Like Eddie is such an entertaining character. Also, although he is just a maniac who murders people, he's really funny. A really funny character. Before we get to the prison, like then it gets dark. But at this point, Eddie is like a comic relief character, even more so than in the original game. Very odd, right? So after this, we get to the hospital, which is the next large gameplay area, where you are locked in the place and cannot leave. Right. It's pretty good stuff. At this point in the game, I was still really enjoying it. the enjoyment will start to fade when we get closer to the end, but at this point, I thought the hospital was just good stuff. It wasn't as long as I was fearing, which is a good thing. So it didn't really throw off the pacing of the original game too much. Like one of the main problems with making all of the areas that are playable so much larger is that there is like an insane amount of time in comparison to the original in between the meaningful story cutscenes and the boss fights and all of this stuff. So I was happy that the hospital wasn't incredibly large. It's bigger than the original, but not the difference isn't that large, or at least it didn't feel like it. I was thoroughly enjoying myself playing through this area. The layout is again different. There are puzzles, new puzzles. Old puzzles are missing. The typewriter stuff is gone. Stuff like this. So again, lots of changes. The layout is very, very different. Like the basement area has been completely remade. Also in a basement, you don't have in a morgue the puzzle with the stretchers and the body bags on them. One thing that I found mind-boggling here, however, after all of this praise, is that there is an X-ray puzzle in the game, in this hospital. So you have pictures of X-ray puzzles and you have to rotate them and put them in the right places. This exact type of puzzle is also in Silent Hill Homecoming. I can't remember the original game having anything like this. If it was, I've forgotten about it, but there is almost exactly a puzzle like this in Silent Hill Homecoming, which is one of the worst games in the series. So if Blooper Team went to Silent Hill Homecoming for inspiration, why on God's green earth would you do that? Why would you get even close to that game? And I like in multiple previous videos when I've talked about Silent Hill, I've said that I don't really mind Homecoming. I don't think it's as bad as people say. It's definitely much better than Downpour in my opinion. But still, it's not a great game. You shouldn't really take anything out of it and put it into this Silent Hill 2 game here. It's an embarrassment to even have to mention Silent Hill Homecoming in the same sentence with Silent Hill 2 and not have the word garbage attached there next to Silent Hill Homecoming. But yeah, don't really have much else to say about the hospital. The nurse redesign I already touched on before. I think it's great. Some people have complained that the nurses don't show as much cleavage as before, which again is a part of the desexualization of the game, which I discussed earlier, which is not a good thing. But if everything else was intact, like Pyramid Head being a sex maniac, Maria being just a sex object, like a flat sex object without any like proper character building or anything like that, it would be fine if the nurses were the old way. But I guess it does add on to the problem of desexualization in a game. Like, it's important because James is a freak in the original game. All of the sexual stuff in the game comes from his mind, right? He's an absolute freak with his fantasies and stuff like that. So removing that from the game is a negative. But otherwise, the nurses, they are creepy. They are really creepy. They come at you very quickly, although they are limping. They are, after you shoot them or hit them with a pipe, they are just dripping blood everywhere. Like their whole bodies are full of blood and it's going everywhere. It's disgusting. It's great. One big change in this area of the game is the pyramid chase sequence, which in the original game, those who have played the game on hard difficulty, this is one of the most difficult and annoying sections in the game, in the original. This section where you are in this tight area of corridors and Pyramid Head comes at you with a spear and tries to spear you and Maria both to death. So you have to turn around, shoot at Pyramid Head, run, turn around, shoot at Pyramid Head, and run, basically, throughout this set of corridors with a really good timing. in order to get through it and get Maria to survive the sequence. In the new game, this has been pretty much removed. It has been turned into this almost like a cutscene, this chase sequence where it's not a cutscene because you are running, like you're controlling the character yourself, but still you aren't doing anything else other than just running in like directly in front of you, like down this one corridor. And it's a plus, it's a minus. It's a plus because one of the most annoying sections in the game has been removed. I think that's good. It's a minus because it's kind of dull. It's a really dull way of doing it. Right, so in this part, Maria gets stabbed to death in between the elevator doors, and we lose her. In the original game, that was shocking, and losing the character. Like, you didn't really even know Maria at this point in the original game, because she didn't talk that much. The most she really did in terms of talking is on the pier when you first meet her, and also in the hospital room where she has to lie down and rest after some traumatic stuff. So you don't really know much about her, and you kind of want to protect her. But because in the remake she does so much more talking, you are with her for such a long time. In the original game, the section from Rosewater Park through the bowling alley, through the Heaven's Night strip club, to the hospital, and through the hospital, it takes so little time. It's such a quick section. You aren't really even with Maria for more than 20 minutes, maybe. If you're not, unless you are walking around slowly looking at the architecture of Silent Hill and admiring the fog. So it's a completely different feeling, because in a remake, I really didn't care that Maria died. I always disliked the character because of what the ending is with her and how she is trying to like replace Mary, which is it's important for James's fantasies, but I really dislike the notion of that, like abandoning your sick wife for this fantasy woman. I really dislike the idea, but yeah, it's an important part of the game anyway. So, but here Maria has done so much talking. You've spent so much time with her. There are so many cutscenes. She's constantly trying to seduce you, even in the new cutscenes. She has this look on her face and this sound in her voice, like she's trying to seduce you constantly, which doesn't happen in the original game. That I really didn't care that she died. I was kind of happy that I got rid of her, to be honest. Right. So after the hospital, there are multiple important changes. So first of all, one of my childhood trauma moments in terms of video games was after the hospital, when you go back to the east side of the map through the lower part of the western Silent Hill map. And there's this pitch black room with this floor that's like a chain link fence type of thing. And in the pitch black, out of nowhere, these enemies attack that are hanging below you. I was so freaked out about this part of the game in the original when I first played it. I just ran through that whole thing, my heart pumping out of my chest. And it's not there in a remake. They moved it. It does happen, but it happens later. Very annoying. I was so much looking forward to this moment. Again, one of those changes that I really don't know why they did it. There are so many parts like this in the game where I'm wondering, are they changing all of these things just to change things and make things seem different, make them seem more fresh? Kind of like when a website gets a redesign and the stuff that was on the right side gets moved to the left side, and the stuff that was on the left side gets moved to the right side, and something from the top goes to the bottom, and then all the important stuff that you need at the top, they are now under this like drop box, and you're wondering what is the point of this redesign if it's just either cosmetic or making things more difficult for you to access stuff on the site. And that's what it feels like to play Silent Hill 2 Remake if you've played the original multiple times. So many of these changes are just, I don't even know why they did them. Next up, after the hospital, we get to a section that really reminds me a lot of the Resident Evil 2 Remake. Resident Evil 2 Remake is fantastic. Much better than the Silent Hill 2 Remake, in my opinion. But in Resident Evil 2 Remake, there's this section after you leave the police station, you are outside, and it is this very restricted area of this like one street with a bunch of wrecked cars all around and things like this. And the next part in the Silent Hill 2 Remake is very similar to that. So in the original game, you were tasked after the hospital to just run back to the area you were in before, at the beginning of the game basically, and get an item from there, and then backtrack all the way to the Rosewater Park and find a statue, and you have to do some wrench work there, right? In the remake, and in the original game, the map didn't really change. There were just more enemies around. But now we are in still like in the hospital. We go into this nightmare mode. Like it's the regular hospital and then the nightmare hospital, or the otherworld hospital, however you want to call it. And the otherworld hospital in the original game ends after or even before you leave the hospital. But now the nightmare continues, and the streets of Silent Hill are still in the nightmare mode. And this section is extremely linear. You're just running in this tube back to the parts in the eastern side of Silent Hill you were at before. And it's just this tube that you run in front of. There's a bunch of enemies, you deal with them and you move on. In the original game, it was completely open. It was basically just backtracking to the beginning of the game and then going back to Rosewater Park. Now, is the originals like running around Silent Hill, is that necessary? Is that good game design? Not necessarily. So I think it's important that some kind of a change was made, but I don't know why it's so linear. It could have been more open. The problem with this section is that the player is not allowed to get lost. Because in the original game, I got lost multiple times during this section. Even when replaying the game, I forgot where I was supposed to go really on the map, and where I got the item and this sort of thing. So I don't like the idea of the player not being allowed to get lost in Silent Hill. Like, that's one of the points of the whole city. It's supposed to be a labyrinth that you don't really know where you're going. There are dead ends. There are enemies everywhere. The fog is thick. You can't really see anything. And this has been removed to a degree in certain points in the game. I don't think that's a good thing. This Nightmare Silent Hill section, I can't remember if there is such a section in the original game at all. It reminds me of Silent Hill 1, where you run around in this nightmare version of Silent Hill in the streets of the city. So maybe this is a Silent Hill 1 reference. I don't know. Yeah. You get the wrench and you move on, blah, blah, blah. At this point, I also realized I forgot the hospital has a boss fight. So let's go back a bit. In the hospital, there is the Flesh Lips boss fight. Laura tricks you into going into a room, and there is a boss. In the original game, this is the worst boss in the game. It's just a couple of dudes hanging from the ceiling, and you blast them away. Now, in the remake, they have completely remade this boss, or redesigned the boss. And I still think this is the worst boss fight in a game. It's just a more annoying version of it. It's a longer version of a really boring boss fight. So now instead of 2 flesh lips, you have 1, and instead of just being able to shoot it, it goes into hiding, like in the first part of the boss fight. This is again like this is a multi-part boss fight. Like many of the boss fights in the game, there's added stuff in it, and it takes like an annoyingly long time to get flesh lips to lower down from the ceiling, so you can shoot him, and you just shoot at the boss once. I don't know if it's a him or her or whatever, but yeah, let's just say it. You shoot it once and it goes back up. And it was so annoying. It took much longer to get through the boss. And then after you deal enough damage, it lowers down from the ceiling or falls down from the ceiling, and it's like a has sights for legs, has multiple legs with these scythe-like blades on it, and it's really fast. It spins around, blah blah blah. I guess it's more exciting than the original, but I didn't really care for it much. Right, so now let's get back to the point where we left off. We are now entering the prison, because we got inside the historical society. Now, the historical society is pretty much the same. It's just a building that you go to in order to get to the prison. There is also the small section where you jump down all of this hole. Like, this is one of my favorite parts of the game, when you are jumping through, you're jumping down a hole and then another hole and then another hole and just going deeper and deeper and deeper. I really like this part a lot. There's even the part where you fall down into this almost a well, and you have to hit the walls to find a secret like exit to get out of the well. There is the room that goes pitch black and is full of bugs. I think this room they completely botched in the remake, because in the original game there is a battery that you have to get as an important story item. And you wonder where this battery is supposed to be used. It's supposed to be used in that room. When the lights go out, your flashlight breaks, you put the battery into the flashlight. But of course, because we don't have menus anymore, we don't have a menu system, we don't have an inventory, really, because it has been removed, which, again, not a huge fan of. You cannot use the battery item. So Bloober Team messed up this scare completely. In the original, you get stuck in the room, the lights go out, you scramble around, you try to figure out what the hell is going on, and then you realize you have the battery, you put it into the flashlight, the whole room is full of bugs, and then you have to go to the keypad and then almost blindly enter a number. You have to decipher what the code is by looking at the numbers and seeing which has been pressed most recently and this sort of thing. They messed up that scare. It was a pretty good scare in the original game, but they tried, I guess. Now we get to Toluca Prison. This is when things start to get dark. Eddie is a maniac. The area is literally almost pitch black. This is one of the best things about this game, these extremely dark areas, because the flashlight is quite useful for the middle of the screen, but the sides of the screen are completely pitch black. And you can hear all of these sounds around you. This is when they introduced a new character that can crawl on walls. Well, it's not a new character in a sense, or a new enemy type in the sense that it's the same guys with the flailing arms for legs, but now it can walk on walls and lunge at you, jump out of the darkness. I got startled multiple times by these guys jumping on me, on top of me from the ceiling, from the walls. So this is by far I think the best area in the game. Incredible. This is also the part in the game where you can see that the new area design, new level design, is kind of superior to the original. If you didn't feel like that already, I can't really see how you would argue against the idea of the level design being better than in the original when you play through the prison. The original prison is very short. It has a bunch of puzzles almost next to one another. You can easily see that the developers would have liked to do probably more with the area, but just couldn't, maybe time constraints. This is something that I do not absolutely do not know for a fact, but that's how it feels like when I'm playing the game. And the new prison is incredible. It's a great area, and a vast improvement on the original. Especially the basement area, which has the death row. The death row section is like an atmospheric masterpiece moment in horror games, when all of the electricity goes out because of the stuff you have to do down there, and that the enemies get released, and it's so good. It's so good. Also, the puzzles, I think it's a very good decision. This is one of the good decisions that Blooper Team made when they moved around all of these puzzles, because they moved from the labyrinth to the prison, the noose puzzle, where you have to like decide who is innocent. They moved it to the pitch black courtyard with the gallows, and it fits perfectly there. Like, that's a no-brainer change. What else do we have here? Not really much. The weight puzzle was a bit annoying because I accidentally tried to solve it the wrong way around and spent a lot of time on a door that wasn't supposed to be opened yet. Very annoying. But overall, I think the prison is just great. The shower room with all of the enemies, just great stuff all around. Now, the labyrinth. This is where the negatives start to pile up. So, before I started playing this game, I played this whole game with a friend. I streamed it to a friend, and we were talking throughout the game, discussing all of the changes and so on. And one of the main changes that I said before we even started was that they must have moved the Abstract Daddy and the Eddie boss fights to be further apart from one another. Because in the original game, they are almost back to back. In the original game, the Abstract Daddy boss fight is far later into the labyrinth than it is now. It has been moved to the beginning of the labyrinth, almost. Now, this is where I'm going to lose a lot of people, because when I read stuff online about this remake, this is apparently the favorite part of a vast number of people who play this remake. And I think this is the absolute worst piece of garbage section in the whole game. And that is the Abstract Daddy boss fight. Now, it is much more cinematic, and it's like this bombastic action sequence, this set piece with the daddy bursting through walls, coming after you, all of this stuff. It's more exciting for some people, sure, especially for people who haven't played the original game. But in terms of what the boss represents, what the boss is, and what the boss fight is like in the original game, I think everything that they changed in the Abstract Daddy boss fight in this remake is for the worse. So let's start going through this massive list of negatives. First of all, this is again a boss fight that used to be just a very quick, short, one section, shoot it with a shotgun, it's over. Now it has, I guess, 3 parts to it. So first, it bursts through a wall and starts to run after you, and you have to shoot it, I guess, or at least I did. Then you get to the section, after you've shot it enough times, where you have to run around these corridors and find television sets and turn those television sets off or like smash them. And after that, you get to the actual boss fight where you kill the boss. Now, this is too much. And this is too much because in the original game, the most important, the most powerful part about the boss fight is that it is just in that one room and you are stuck with the Abstract Daddy in it. Now, those who don't know what the Abstract Daddy is, it's basically, the design of it is a bed with two people on top of one another on the bed. And the bed has legs and arms and a mouth and runs at you. Now, this is Angela's nightmare. Because it's difficult to talk about this section because I don't want to use the words that would most closely describe the situation that Angela has gone through. Let's just say that Angela has a lot of trauma from her childhood because of her dad and what he did to her. If you catch my drift, there's a bed and two people on the bed. You know what I mean. It's not good. And in the original game, when you enter this room, there's this cutscene with Angela and the Abstract Daddy is in the room. Now, in the remake, they have made it more explicit that it's Angela's bedroom that you're in. In the original game, it's this awful room full of flesh holes in the walls being penetrated. Now, all of this penetration stuff has been removed from the remake. Again, another way in which the game has been desexualized and cleaned up for, I guess, a modern audience, whatever that means. If a modern audience means making the game worse, then cool. So, in the original game, you are in this one room with Angela sitting there in a corner, and after a short cutscene, you are just face to face with this monster that is coming straight at you and is attempting to do to you basically what he has done to Angela, if you catch my drift. So in the original game, this was one of the hardest boss fights because the fight takes completely place in this one tiny room where you can barely move. And there was a technique to this in hard mode especially. While the cutscene was, after the cutscene there was a loading screen, and while the loading screen was loading, you had to start walking backwards and you would get a couple of extra steps before the visuals come back on the screen. You got a couple of extra steps, you have the shotgun in hand, you fire 2 shots at Abstract Daddy, run behind it, turn around, hope that you got the timing right, shoot twice again, and repeat until it dies. It takes how many? 8 or 10 shots, I think, on hard mode. Maybe 12, I can't remember anymore. Far fewer on the lower difficulty levels. So it's a very short boss fight. And this is why it's extremely effective. You are stuck in this tiny room with this absolutely horrendous monster, like the most disgusting and awful monster in the game series, not just this game, in the game series, and one of the most awful monsters in the history of video games. And it's face to face with you, and there's nowhere for you to run away, right? And it is trying literally to sexually assault you and kill you while doing it. It's awful, right? So what do Blooper Team decide is the most obvious thing that they should do when they remake this game? Remove all of those aspects. Now the boss fight is not in that one room. It's this multi-part, massive set piece, out of a Hollywood movie. And the Abstract Daddy is really never that close to you unless you panic. It's very easy to dodge all of his attacks. Then there is the middle section with the television sets. And I think this part is absolutely disgusting. This is disgusting. On the television sets, you can hear the voice of Abstract Daddy when he was human, talking to Angela. And I know that Blooper Team isn't trying to do this. They are not trying to humanize this monster, but that is inadvertently what they are doing here. They are giving a human voice to this awful, horrible, disgusting character and making him less of a monster. Why on earth would you ever decide to do that? That is the absolute worst and most disgusting thing about this whole remake. Having Abstract Daddy have a human voice. Even though the stuff that he's talking is awful as well, like it's not making him look more like a good guy. To the contrary, it's making him look more like a bad guy. But it does make him less of a monster. You cannot make this change. It's awful. It's disgusting. And this whole boss fight is bloated. It took me a long time to then find all of the television sets. I'm running around this labyrinth looking for these television sets, thinking like, this is awful. Why have they done this to one of the greatest moments in the original game? Like this is by far my favorite boss fight in the original game. It is such a ridiculously effective and disturbing boss fight in the original game. Now, after you destroy all of the television sets, you get to this new final arena. And is it a small room that is close quarters? No, it's this massive hall in which you can just dodge all of the attacks by Abstract Daddy. I think I got hit once by the boss, and that was because I didn't know that he had this fast lunging attack. Because again, they have made the boss fight arena so much larger that the bosses must have new movement sets. It's awful. It's awful. It's the easiest boss fight in the game, pretty much. Except for maybe the first Pyramid Head fight in the apartments. The hardest, most hard-hitting and impactful boss fight in the game has been turned into this Hollywood, bombastic, cinematic garbage that's the easiest boss fight pretty much in the game. How can you do this? This is absolutely disgusting. And again, this goes to show that Blooper Team absolutely did not respect the original game in all of the parts in the remake. There are many parts where they did and where they succeeded, I think, fantastically. I've talked about them before in this video that is now almost 2 hours long. So there you have it. Thank you to the 50 people who are listening, who are still with me. I think the new Abstract Daddy boss fight this is probably the one boss fight that I wouldn't have changed almost at all. And one reason for that is because the new dodge mechanic, I think, would have made it more manageable to fight Abstract Daddy close quarters. I think the new dodge mechanic would have worked perfectly with this boss. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe they had something smaller in mind, but the playtesting and everything just didn't work. It just didn't work out. I don't know. Could be the case. But I think it could have been kept pretty much the same, just in this one tiny room. Now, one thing that I've heard people talk about with this, where I think both sides are wrong. So I'm going to lose everyone who's listening. One half of people are saying that this boss fight is worse than the original because it's less subtle. Because the original Abstract Daddy Angela relationship and the boss fight was so subtle. And then the other half of people are saying that this new fight is better because it's not subtle, and they didn't understand when they were playing the original game what was even going on. They didn't understand that this was Angela's father doing awful things to Angela. And to this I just have to shake my head and wonder, what are people talking about? The original game is not subtle at all about Angela's and Abstract Daddy's relationship. Not at all. When you first enter the boss fight room and you see the pulsating flesh holes in the walls being penetrated, and if you don't understand at that point what is going on, you are probably half illiterate. You should probably work on your literacy. because it should be absolutely, no questions about it, obvious what is going on there. Now, the original character model for Abstract Daddy is more subtle and is more, well, abstract. So you can't as clearly see that there are two people on the bed and so on, but it should be obvious still that it's a bed with like people on it. And Angela is just sitting there in a corner crying while you are blasting this monster in the face with a shotgun. And then after the boss fight, she takes a television set and smashes it on top of the monster, and you get this cutscene with her. Now, for the people who think that the new version is better because it's not subtle, again, I think all of the new dialogue added to the cutscene after the boss fight is awful. I guess this is part of what they are referring to, not just the character models, but after the boss fight, there is this cutscene, which while I was playing, I was thinking like this doesn't sound like what it was in the original game. And after finishing the game, I went to YouTube and I watched both versions, both cutscenes, and all of the parts that I said to my friend who was watching me play this, all of the parts that I said to her about like this is awful writing, all of that was new. In the original game, you don't have any of this melodramatic bullshit with close-ups of Angela's crying face and her saying like I hate you to Abstract Daddy. None of that was in the original game. It was all added to this remake, and it's all awful writing. It is absolutely awful writing. Like this is Silent Hill 2 for dummies. You know those books like Gardening for Dummies with the cartoon character on the front cover. This game, this remake, is Silent Hill 2 for dummies. And it's not just this section. It's the time loop stuff that I will talk about next when we get to the Eddie boss fight. It's the added cutscenes that build on the themes of the game in the middle of the game, when it isn't even necessary. It's the added notes. It's like all of this stuff is just nonsense that doesn't add to the game. It should be removed. It should never have been added to the game. So the new writing, the new dialogue lines for Angela, awful, just again generic, boring, awful horror writing. This is a hot take. I think Blooper Team should fire their entire writing team, not just because of Silent Hill 2 Remake, but also because of the medium and the other stuff that they have produced, because it is painfully obvious that they aren't competent enough to work at this level. Like this is not good enough. Like this is the greatest horror game probably of all time, and you are adding your own mediocre garbage writing into it. A lot of people, including myself, were quite hopeful for this remake because there was already a script and a ready set of dialogue and character building and everything like this available to Blooper Team. They didn't have to invent really anything, or wouldn't have needed to invent anything for this game. But no, they just had to add all of this nonsense into the game, all of this mediocre, like this is our stuff. Let's put it here into this masterpiece, and it's all just mediocre. It's really frustrating, right? So all of the effect of the original boss fight is gone. It's not one room, one monster, no place to run. It's this stupid running around these corridors, listening to this human version of Abstract Daddy ramble on, and this awful ending cutscene after the boss fight, which adds all of this nonsense melodramatic stuff and this new writing that is just it's childish. It doesn't sound like adults wrote it. It's awful. Right, so that's Abstract Daddy. I guess I covered everything I wanted to. I think this is the absolute low point of the remake and the worst part of the whole game. I hated everything about this Abstract Daddy boss fight. Absolutely everything. Now, the holes from the original boss fight room, they are there in the boss fight. They have been moved to the corridors, and there isn't anything penetrating them. So, again, desexualization, just blah, blah, blah. Stupid changes. Could be that it was forced on them. Maybe they were forced to remove it. I don't know. But still, they should have said no. Like, we're not even finishing this game. If you try to affect the overall quality of the game in this way, I would have if I was working on this game and I saw what they were doing with this, I would have walked out of the company. I would have quit and gone somewhere else. I hate this part so much. It's awful, right? And after all of this ranting, we get to the labyrinth, which was not a great. Well, in the original game, it was all right because it was very short and it was quite creepy. These endless corridors with dead ends, and then these cavern areas underneath with that have been flooded with water. What is the first thing? Well, the first thing that I see when I get to the labyrinth is a flesh wall that kind of reminds me of Silent Hill 3, which is interesting. In Silent Hill 3, when you get to the after the construction site, you get inside the building with all of the office spaces and the companies. There's a flesh wall puzzle where you have to get rid of this flesh wall. And it kind of reminded me of that for some reason. I could be completely off. Maybe it's not a reference, but that's the feeling that I got. And some of the puzzles from the original game are still here. They've been moved around. There's a part where you have to find a lighter and some lighter fluid and burn stuff. That's still there. But what is the second thing that I see when I enter the labyrinth? After the flesh wall, I see the rotating head puzzle, which I hate in the original game. It is such a waste of time in the original game. In the original game, it's just one little puzzle. You have to rotate this stone statue head, which, while you rotate it, rotates a room with a bunch of doorways in it. So you have to find the right angle for the statue head, and then you have to enter the room. It has been expanded here. There are 3 different places you have to get to through this puzzle, and there's also some hidden stuff with collectibles and items in it. I didn't necessarily hate it in the remake because I think visually it's much more impressive than in the original game. It looks like a concrete apartment building, like block, an unfinished, falling apart building, and it looks quite nice. However, at this point in the game, I was starting to feel fatigue. I was kind of hoping that the last couple of areas wouldn't be too long. I was kind of hoping that I would get this game over with at this point. And it didn't help it that this was a 3-parter. All the 3 areas are fine. You just go through them. It's like going through the motions at this point. You get to Pyramid Head's room. One thing that I didn't really like is that in the original game, the Pyramid Head room was almost more of an Easter egg. It wasn't. You weren't forced to go there. You found it if you found it. But in a remake, you have to go through the room. Again, an example of Blooper Team just hitting the players over the head with this all of this stuff. Like, look, here's Pyramid Head. Here's his room. Go there. You have to go there, and you even get a trophy for it. You walk into the room and you get a trophy for walking into a room that you have to go into in order to progress in the game. Look, this is Pyramid Head's room. Come on. it's still a nice looking room, and Pyramid Head is there trying to kill you. However, this time he doesn't have a spear anymore. In the original Labyrinth, he had a spear, like when he killed Maria. Oh, by the way, Maria is here in the Labyrinth. I forgot about the cutscene. So this is the part where, well, for example, the opening shots in the story trailer are from this, where Maria is there sitting behind bars on this bed. This is that area. And in the original game, the Abstract Daddy boss fight was after, it was right at the end of the Labyrinth. So it was moved quite a bit. To quite very heavy-handedly, almost into a different spot. It kind of fits there anyway. That's probably the only good thing that I have to say about the Abstract Daddy boss fight, is that it kind of fits where they put it. Right. So after you get through the rotating head puzzle things, the areas behind the doors are parts from the original game that have been expanded into these larger things, as you could guess, because that's what they did with all of the areas. So it's all right. And after playing through this, you get to the cutscene where Maria is there again, dead. So Maria is dead again. And for some reason, you pick up a Pyramid Head sword, and with that you get through the flesh wall. I don't know what to think of this change, because in the original game you don't do this. The Pyramid Head sword is a hidden weapon that you can pick up in New Game Plus in the original game. However, you can't swing it here at all. It could be that it's also in the New Game Plus. I don't know, because I haven't played the New Game Plus, but I just thought this was weird. But also looked kind of cool. So pluses and minuses, I don't know. Now we are nearing the end. Here at the end of the Labyrinth, we have the Eddie boss fight. So think of this, if you haven't played the original game, in the original game, after the Maria laying on the bed dead cutscene, you get, if I remember correctly, after that cutscene, you get the Abstract Daddy boss fight. Or maybe it was before the cutscene. I can't remember which way around it was. I think it was after. Then you go into a corridor where you do the noose puzzle that you already did in the prison in the remake. And after that, you jump through a couple of holes and there's an Eddie boss fight. So there's boss fight, very short gameplay section, another boss fight. So I think the pacing has been made better in this section of the game by moving the bosses around. Now the Eddie boss fight, again, this is a 3-part fight, much longer than the original. One thing that I didn't like about the game is that they completely removed the first section of the fight. So after you jump down the hole in your grave, you're in a graveyard and there's a grave with your name on it, and you jump in it. You get to this meat locker part with just butchered carcasses of animals lying, hanging from racks. And in the first room, there's a cutscene with Eddie. And in the original fight, this was awful in the original fight. You were in this tiny room with Eddie, and he just shot at you with the magnum that he has. He has a massive magnum that he blasts you with. And there was a trick to this in the original game, that if you equipped the steel pipe, and during the cutscene, while it was playing, you held down the attack button and just kept it down, you would infinitely just smack Eddie on the head with the pipe, and he would just run at you without doing anything. It was a fun bug. It was a really fun bug. Without that bug, that section would have been awful in the original game. But they completely removed it. They could have tried to left some kind of a nod to this bug, because it's one of the more famous things about the original game's hard mode for those people who have played it. Everyone uses it. it has been completely removed. I also understand why they would remove it, because the first section of the boss fight in the original game was just ass. It was awful. Now, when it comes to the time loop stuff, and again, Blooper Team hitting the player over the head with stupid shit and making the game dumber, as I said before, Silent Hill 2 for dummies. In this first meat locker room, there are 6 James Sunderlands. So you, the player, and then 5 corpses on the ground that are obviously James Sunderland. The same clothes, the same hairstyle, everything. So at this point, we can take the theory of time loops and just bury it, because it has been made canon. Why would you not let fun things like this be fun things? Why do you have to make them explicit and boring? It was fun when the game had all this stuff to speculate about. They've also added new stuff in there to speculate about, lots of this occult stuff. There's a lot more of that. So I guess that's a good thing. But like these old theories that people had, why would you just say that, yeah, this is canon? All right, cool. Now, the Eddie boss fight itself, I think this is a great boss fight. I really like this boss fight. Some positivity for a change. It's 3 sections or 3 rounds of you versus Eddie in the meat locker. And it's pretty much the same as the original game, where you hide behind these like racks of meat. The difference is that they can break, so you can't just sit there behind one rack and stay there. So you have to do a bit of moving, and then when you have the chance, shoot at Eddie. After you do enough damage, he turns the room. He turns down the visibility in the room. There's this kind of like a fog that turns up, and it's much darker, so you can't really see where he is, but you kind of can see at times. I think this has been implemented perfectly. The flashlight works extremely well in this section of the boss fight. And then in the third part, the racks of meat start moving, so you have to keep moving along with them. And I think this is a great redesign. Really fun boss fight. Almost like the original, but with some new twists. Like the exact opposite of Abstract Daddy. It wasn't overdone. It's a fun fight, a good time for old players and new players. And Eddie is the GOAT of Silent Hill 2 Remake. The best character in the whole game. I will die on that hill. Now, we have 2 more sections, or 3 actually, if you count the credits and everything like that. Now, the next thing that I'm going to complain about is something that I never would have thought I would complain about, and that is the rowing section on the lake. Now, in the original game, another notorious section, incredibly difficult on hard mode. There is a trophy for it in the HD collection on the PS3, and it's also a requirement for the 10-star run in the original game, that you have to get across the lake in 1 minute and 20 seconds under that. It's really difficult. Again, there was a technique to it. You turn to the right for around 3 to 4 seconds, and you start rowing forward, and just you learn to do it. And when you learn how to move the DualShock sticks in the correct speed, in the correct rhythm, you will get it. But it took a lot of practice. It was a skill minigame, basically. And now it has been completely nerfed. There is a trophy in a game for being on the lake for 10 minutes. Like, that's the opposite of the original intent of the whole rowing thing. And I actually failed that trophy because the screen just turned white and I was teleported to the cutscene. I had to redo the 10 minutes at the lake bit for the trophy. That was a good time. And now again, Blooper Team making things dumber and making the game dumber. Instead of having to find the light, you already face it. Just immediately, it's right there. Just go forward. Just press forward, dummy. No need to find the light. No need to learn to row in the game. It's right there. Just keep going. And I don't like this at all. Why? Why can't there be any skill? Maybe it's different in New Game Plus or the harder difficulty levels. I don't know. But on just a standard New Game on the normal difficulty, the rowing has been completely nerfed. I don't like that at all. All right. So now we get to the hotel, which is the last section, and it's all right. Again, at this point, I was very burnt out already by the game, and it has been expanded. There are new rooms, lots of new rooms to enter. This was again one of those parts where I started thinking, like, why are they doing all these changes? So in the original game, you have the restaurant with the Laura cutscene, where Laura talks about the letter that she got from Mary. That's on the right side of the restaurant. Now it's on the left side of the restaurant. Just these weird changes for the sake of changing stuff. It's harmless, but I just don't know why they do it. Like, why can't you keep at least something like it was in the original? Isn't that the point of a remake? To be like the original, but more modern and new? The Resident Evil 2 remake shits on this remake. Also the Dead Space remake. Also stuff like the Shadow of the Colossus remake by Bluepoint and Demon's Souls remake, right? Those companies didn't feel the need to rewrite stuff, to add all of this nonsense, mediocre nonsense, to redo all of the boss fights, basically. Could you imagine a Shadow of the Colossus remake where all of the boss fights were now different? The fur was placed in different limbs? Or something ridiculous like that? Just such an idiotic idea. But in this game, Blooper Team, they redid everything. Oh, this room, well, it used to be there, but now it's here. And this room used to be on the second floor, now it's on the first floor. And this boss fight used to be in this room, but now it's in this new room. That's far worse than the original room. Like, it's the longer I played this game, the more I started to feel annoyed by it. In Resident Evil 2 Remake, there is new stuff, there is new content. The opening of the game is completely new. There is a whole section in the police station that is brand new, but most of the stuff is still there. Like you would remember it from having played. I played the original Resident Evil 2, I think in the early 2000s. It wasn't brand new when I played it. In the early 2000s, I think. I played the first disc. I never played the second disc. I should probably play the second disc at some point, because I still haven't done it, but yeah. Also, the Dead Space remake, they redid so much stuff in that game, but it's all of the worst stuff made better. That's a difference. In here, they took some of the best parts of the game and made them worse. That's mind-boggling to me. All right, let's move on with the hotel. So you go through the hotel, it's expanded, it's larger, there's new puzzles, old puzzles have been removed. I think the music box puzzle is far worse in the remake. In the original, there was this, it was very basic, like there were these hints, like where you have to put them. There are 3 slots where you have to put them, like little riddles for all of the different like Grimm brothers princesses that they are. Like the Little Mermaid and so on, or not Grimm brothers Grimm, like the people who wrote the stories in 1800s. But now it's this annoying connect the dots style puzzle. I don't like that at all. Now, some of the best parts in the hotel there are 2 parts that I want to highlight before I start to rant again. The section where you lose all of your weapons and items and you have to use the The elevator with the weight limit. I thought that section was really good. It's really tense. It's more dangerous. There are more dangerous opponents. It has been completely redesigned. There are all these pathways that you can take to hide from the enemies and avoid contact, avoid fighting them. And yeah, I really like this section of the game. Very well done. By far the best part of the game after the prison. Everything after the prison up to this point I didn't really care for. And then there is a mini-boss, which is a new thing. There is a hanger enemy, so the guys who hang on the floors below you. Now this guy is on the ceiling, and he bursts through a wall and comes at you. And that was very exciting. I really liked this mini-boss. I was very surprised by it. And yeah, good stuff. Then we get to the end of the game. So we get to the room, which is James's and Mary's special place. And there is the VHS tape. It's alright, the cutscenes, nothing wrong with that, I don't think. I should have watched before filming this a comparison of the VHS tape in the original game and the new game, because I really can't remember what the original was like, how different it was from the remake one, but I didn't really pay much attention to it in the remake, that it was bad or anything like that. Now, after the Abstract Daddy boss fight, we get to the second worst part of the game, which is after you watch the VHS tape and you enter the Otherworld Hotel or the Nightmare Hotel, you run through the area again, and oh yeah, one thing about the music in this section before we get to the Angela cutscene. For some reason, the music cut off in the middle of this section for me. Maybe that's a bug. In the middle of going through the Nightmare Hotel section, this has one of my favorite tracks from the original game, which is just this wailing electronic soundscape that drowns everything. I love it so much. And it just cut out completely in the middle of this section. And there was no music anymore. Very underwhelming. But yeah, now we get to the second worst part of this whole remake, which is if not the most famous cutscene from the game, at least one of them. Maybe the most famous cutscene from the game is the videotape with Mary's monologue. But the part with Angela and the flaming stairs, again, I do not understand why, but it feels like everything that has to do with Angela has been messed up. It feels like different teams developed the rest of the game and all the stuff that has to do with Angela. I don't know how this is possible, because this cutscene has been completely butchered. Completely and utterly butchered. So let's talk for a moment about the direction of the cutscenes in the game. In general, in the original game, there is this odd, and I mean this with love, there is this odd, very amateurish feel to the whole thing. It doesn't feel like a professionally made video game when it comes to the cutscenes and also the voice acting. Glad that I remembered the voice acting. Both the voice acting and the direction of the cutscenes have this amateurish feel to it, but it's perfect for some reason. It has a charm to it that fits Silent Hill. And it gives the game, again, a sense of this otherworldly atmosphere. None of these people feel real. They feel like they are just husks, barely human. if some of them are human, they are barely human anymore. And this feel is in part, in the original game, also affected by the direction of the cutscenes, which is not professional at all. Very few of the shots in the original game are properly framed, so the characters and the items in the cutscenes are just in weird places. In some cutscenes, there are characters that are barely fit the screen. At times, they're swaying all over the place, and it doesn't look. It looks compelling in a weird way, but it doesn't look professional. And this feel has been completely removed in the remake. In the original game, the camera was just often the shots were very long, and the camera was just floating there. It was floating at an awkward distance to the characters and moving to one side for some reason that I don't know. The camera angles were often quite strange from a sometimes from high on top, from like a bird's eye view, sometimes from a low angle tilted up, and it was odd. It was really odd. In the new game, it looks modern. It probably looks better to 99% of the people who play the game. It probably looks a lot better. But to the 1% like me, it looks completely off. The cutscenes are professionally made. There are many more cuts. The camera movements and the camera angles are what you would expect. There are many more close-ups of people's faces to show off their emotions. Again, this is something that I think is a miscalculation on the part of Blooper Team. This amount of showing the emotions of the characters on their faces. In the original game, many of the characters don't really show that much emotion, or if they do, they show it through actions. Their faces, due to technical restrictions most likely, their faces aren't very that detailed. But in a remake, you have all of these emotions on the people's faces all the time, and I think it's too much. Because I think it's important to show the player that these people are completely broken as humans. Angela, Eddie, James doesn't even show any emotion for the most part. Like, he's gone. He's completely gone. Angela is also completely gone. She's just angry at this point in the game, like really mad. Eddie also lost his mind. Mary is just neutral. Maria used to be quite neutral in the original game, but now in this game she's this odd, seductive, weird person. I use the word melodramatic when discussing the labyrinth cutscene with the after the abstract edit boss fight with Angela, and this does have a melodramatic tinge to it throughout the game with all of the close-ups. I don't know why they decided to change the direction of the cutscenes as much as they did. Probably because they wanted to make it modern and look good. But I don't want the Silent Hill 2 cutscenes to look good. I want them to feel like out-of-body experiences. I want them to feel like you are watching, like you are observing from afar broken people. And that's not the effect that we get at all from the new cutscenes. However, this cutscene with Angela is quite different in many ways to what I just described. Because in this cutscene, the camera angles, especially for the last shot, so this is the most famous line from this cutscene. It's the part where Angela tells James, "Oh, you can see them too," referring to the fire. "For me, it's always like this." And then she turns around and starts walking up the stairs into the fire. Go to YouTube, put that cutscene on, and freeze frame the cutscene on that, like in that shot, and look at how ugly it is. It is the ugliest shot I have seen in years in anything. And I've watched horrible movies that I've given 1 out of 10 scores to. Like, this is one of the ugliest images I have ever seen. For some reason, like before the ending shot, again, talking about pointless changes. In the original game, the cutscene is shot, like this part before the final shot is shot from a low angle from the right side of the room, and the camera isn't tilted, it's straightforward, like just from a down angle. In the remake, it's on a left side, and it's in like a 45-degree angle. They are going for some odd fake Dutch angle shot, and it is the ugliest piece of shit shot I have ever seen. It looks disorienting, and not in a good way, not in like a, oh, we're in a dream world sort of way. It just looks bad. And why they decide to do this in the most important moment of this iconic cutscene, to completely change it like this, I don't know. Ask Blooper Team. It's awful. Also, one thing that this is a kind of maybe a weird complaint, but there's a lot less fire in a cutscene. In many shots, this was noticeable because there are shots in the cutscene where the fire doesn't even seem to be there. You can't even tell that the stairs are on fire. Almost. But then near the end there is more fire, so it's okay. But maybe this is a technical restriction, I don't know. But it's strange. It's really strange. Right. And then there is one more complaint that I have about this cutscene, and this is an important one. This is a personal complaint. Like, I don't know if this is something that other people have thought of, but in the remake, you are removed from the room during the cutscene. In the original game, you are not. You are allowed to stay in that room, and you are in the room with the flaming staircase, with the music still playing there after the cutscene is over. And that is so important. That is such a powerful moment. And if you want to, which is something that I always do when I play the game, you can turn around and you can try to walk after Angela into the fire, but you can't because the fire damages you. And this has been completely removed from the remake, and I hate this change so much. So in the remake, you are removed from the room during the cutscene and you can't go back into the room. The door is locked. Why? The moment after the cutscene, after all of this great dialogue between James and Angela, and this incredibly powerful moment, right? The fact that you are still in the room and you are just standing there, like floored. You can stand there forever thinking about what you just witnessed. Like, that scene is powerful. It's amazing. In the original game, not in the remake, but in the original game, that scene is amazing. And then after you leave the room in the original game, that's when it goes back to normal. And this is something that I cannot accept. As a longtime fan of the game, as a super fan of the original game, I cannot accept this change. It's awful. And again, goes to show that Blooper Team do not respect the original Silent Hill 2 in many of these spots where I have criticized the changes that they have made. There are other spots that in which they do respect the game, so it's not completely bad, but some of these changes are mind-bogglingly awful. I cannot understand why they would do this. Now, after this, we only have the final bosses and the short gameplay section before them. So the two bosses in the end, they are all right. The first one with the double pyramid heads is pretty much exactly the same as in the original game. For some reason, for this fight, they decided to keep the arena quite small. So there's less room here to fight these two pyramid heads than there was, for example, at the beginning of the game to fight just the one pyramid head, which is strange. And it's like the boss fight is just the same. It's good. Nothing surprising about this one, luckily. And then we get to the final boss fight, and again, it's a 3-part marathon. Why? In the original game, it's short. Why are you making me fight these bosses for so long? Again, it's more bombastic, it's more energetic. It probably pleases the modern audiences, whoever the fuck they are, and so on. But it's just too much. The boss has so much HP. It took me such a long time to beat her. So this is the Mary flying in the air, throwing moth like butterflies at you. And yeah, it's a 3-parter. The first part is pretty much the same as the only part of this boss fight in the original game. Then you get taken underground into this building and you have to dodge her, and kind of reminded me a little bit of the Flesh Lips boss fight early on, the first part of that boss fight, which is not good. And then the third fight, we again go back into the original room, and she's just there on the floor, hacking away at you with some blades for some reason. And it takes a long time to beat her. So, not a huge fan of the final boss either, unfortunately. It's alright, it's fine. But I don't know what is this trend of making these boss fights so long and have so many different moving parts to them, so many sections. Why can't you just have a simple boss fight with one part and make it enjoyable and fun and exciting? Right. And then we go to the ending. I got the leave ending, unfortunately. I really like the in-water ending, which is the most depressing ending in the game. I usually try to go for that one on first playthrough, but I got the leave ending, which is kind of like it's a fake good ending, because although Laura and James leave Silent Hill, obviously they aren't leaving Silent Hill. They can't leave, right? They are in a loop, like an endless loop of torment. Like they're coming straight back. So it's a fake good ending. And there was an odd bug here, where after the cutscene, the ending cutscene, before the credits, the skip button just pressed itself down and skipped the credits for me. Like, those who don't know, all of the different endings have a theme song to them. So all the different endings and the credits have a different song playing. And I wanted to hear the leave song, but I couldn't because the game just skipped the credits for me. So thanks for that. I don't know why that even happened. I wasn't even touching the controller. I didn't even have the controller in my hand. Maybe by laying it down on the table, it was pressing down, maybe like L2, R2 or something like that. Does the game skip from those buttons? I don't know. That's the only explanation I can get, other than that it's bugged. Right. And then we get to the ending, like the end. So this is the screen where you are shown all of the statistics for your playthrough. And here I was shocked that Blooper Team has completely, at least from the new game, removed the rating system. The original game and also the third one used to have a rating system depending on how you did in the game, you would get a rating from 1 star to 10 stars. And the 10-star run in Silent Hill 2 is notoriously difficult. I've never been able to do it. In the 10-star run in the original game, you have to beat the game in under an hour and 30 minutes, I think? Or is it 2 hours? Something like that. And you have to kill 75 enemies with melee, 75 enemies with ranged weapons. You cannot take more than, I think, 500 points of damage. So basically, if you get hit a couple of times by Abstract Daddy, it's over. Your run is ruined. You have to also cross the lake rowing in under a minute and 20 seconds. And you have to do all of this by only saving twice throughout the whole run. So basically, you save once before the Pyramid Head Maria chase corridor, and you save once before Abstract Daddy. And you have to, like, all the parts in between have to be perfect. It's really difficult. But as far as I can tell, there's no rating system in a new game, so there are no 10-star runs anymore. Why would they change this? One reason is obviously that the game's much longer, but they could have taken the new length and the amount of enemies and just revamped the rating system, maybe moved the numbers around a bit. I don't know. Maybe there's again some reason why they decided to remove this. Probably is something that I can't really think of right now, but yeah, I don't know. Disappointing. And on that note, we can end this review. It only took 2.5 hours. A couple of cuts. In between this rant about the cutscenes, I didn't mention it at the start of the video. I'll mention it now. I ran out of storage on my camera, so I had to stop filming again and start again. So this last 15 minutes has been again another cut. But I managed to get to the end, even with batteries running out and storage room running out, and hopefully someone got something out of this. I really, really love the original game, as you can probably tell, so that affects my assessment of this remake a lot, like an undescribable amount. But I don't know, I think it's great that people are enjoying the game. A lot of people are enjoying the game, although I disagree with many of the things why they enjoy the game. And I think many of those parts are some of the worst in the game, and some parts I wish Blooper Team hadn't changed so much and had kept more intact and had shown more respect to, especially the Abstract Daddy and the final cutscene with Angela. These changes are unacceptable for me. And even after all of this ranting and raving and complaining, I still give the game a light 8 out of 10. Because I did enjoy playing through the game, especially the first, let's say, 2/3. All the way through the prison, I really enjoyed playing through the game. All the complaints up to that point are quite minor. But yeah, the labyrinth and all the Angela stuff at the end of the game just completely ruined the experience for me. And that's probably the main reason why I didn't want to start a New Game Plus immediately. Maybe the New Game Plus fixes some of these problems that I've mentioned. I hope so, but I'll find that out when I get to that stuff. So yeah, thanks for listening. If you made it to the end, congratulations. I'll be back again next week with something less than 2.5 hours in length, some collection stuff, most likely Blu-ray. But yeah, I'll see you next week. Bye bye.